Good morning, folks. Welcome to Coffee with Artists. My name is Rachel Wilkins. Delighted to be here this morning. Welcome, welcome. I have a great guest on the show this morning. I am joined by Steve Sullivan, who goes by Sully. Welcome to the show, Steve. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So Steve is a mixed media artist, originally born and bred in Massachusetts, now living in Boston. Steve, you described your work as resourceful. Tell us why that word was kind of at the forefront of your description of your work.
Sure, yeah. So I guess it was kind of like it applied to several stages of the game. Like it could be resourceful in the sense that like a lot of the mixed media materials themselves are usually recycled materials. So finding a new, and then, or just materials that I had on hand even, so like without necessarily having to go. And this sort of stemmed also from my MFA project that I did, a thesis show where it was mostly recycled materials. So just using, being able to use the materials you have on hand instead of, paying a ton of money out of pocket to get the specific things that you need for the project. So that was one aspect of it. And then also just within the practice itself, a lot of times would kind of let the materials sort of dictate or just sort of like place them intuitively and then try to build a composition or a successful piece out of it. So just sort of working with what you're presented with visually, what the materials give you, and then you have to act that way. And then also just kind of conceptually too, like being where a lot of the work that I do sort of is about mining value out of objects, but also even like experiences too. So sometimes it takes a certain amount of resourcefulness to be able to do that. So yeah, it just felt like a word that sort of fit really well through all the different aspects of my practice for now anyway. But
wonderful. And, art supplies can be expensive. I don't think a lot of people realize, but, for me now, I prefer to shop somewhere like Home Depot for supplies, just because the cost of art supplies can just really get up there.
Oh, yeah. So, house paint, even like you can get free samples and stuff. So, yeah, so I normally wouldn't even do, I mean, my passion or my first like love, I guess you would say, is oil paint. But of course, that's like the most expensive. So like a lot of the stuff when I got back into my practice about this time last year was when I really started getting back into it after I was celebrating a few months of sobriety. And I normally wouldn't go with acrylics, but I was just, again, trying to just kind of work with like what I had on hand. And I had all these like paper receipts still from my MFA project that I did. And I had used like hundreds, and then I still had like hundreds left over. So I had a ton. So I was like, well, what do I have? I had some canvases and I had these receipts, and I had a lot of like acrylic paint that I never used. So I started going back into like acrylics and stuff like that. And so yeah, just kind of like using what I had on hand already to see, because I think that sometimes your creative choices can be a little bit more interesting when you're limited when you set certain limitations, and that is a limitation that anyone can set on themselves. Like, well, this is what I have to work with, so what can I make?
Tell us about that MFA project and the use of these receipts, kind of the meaning behind that.
Yeah, so I went to Mass Art for the MFA program, and I was in the low residency program. So it's actually really it's a great program and a great format in that a lot of people who maybe were looking to pursue a master's degree or an advanced degree, but normally wouldn't have the opportunity to, because obviously it's a lot to to just stop everything for 2 years and go to grad school. So the way that it's set up is that you have your own time during the fall and the spring. So you do have online requirements, and then you work with a mentor that's Mass Art approved, and so you work in your own studio and do your own practice. You can also maintain your own life, like your own, if you have because a lot of people end college and then they start a family, they start their own career, and it's like to stop everything, go back to school. So you can still maintain those things and be enrolled in this program. And then over the summertime, it was almost like summer school. We would all show up on campus and do like 6-7 weeks of intensive stuff. So the last summer, the way it works out is you have 3 summers within that, and the third summer is your thesis show. So a lot of my development as an artist there, I went in as a painter, and the joke was like, with a couple people in the classes behind me were like, am I going to still be able to paint? Because so many people went in as painters, and then they just developed so much conceptually, and that they ended up working in avenues that they never thought they would. So I ended up, my thesis show was actually a lot of like sculptural and installation type work. Very little, if any, painting. I mean, there was like compositional color choices and stuff, but I was using the working with the ideas of like waste and labor, and then value of is kind of like the theme that always seems to pop up. And I was kind of comparing these disparate worlds that I had in myself of my Peace Corps experience in Senegal in West Africa, where I was for 3 years, and I was doing food production there, working in food security there, and then to come home to the States, and I kind of didn't really have a direction yet, and then to work in a restaurant where it's food production on a completely different scale in a like corporate chain restaurant, and so food production overseas, and then trying to just like remedy that with my position as a server in the States, and then addressing kind of like my estrangement between both worlds. So I was using like recycled material from the restaurant, not like legit food from the restaurant, but like things that I could use. Like this restaurant used popcorn a lot, and threw away a lot of it at the end of the day. So I would save that. I did a lot of big pieces. You can see it on my website at buysully.com. But it's like really big plexi pieces that I did. One where it was like a Senegalese fabric pattern, but it was all in the popcorn from the restaurant, like the yellow and white pieces. I of course saved my actual receipts from orders, and then just like blacked out the important information, but then put those on the plexi, and then I used my own order sheets that I take with for each order. And so the idea was just kind of like, they all kind of had their own niche about like waste and labor, and then the labor one being kind of like, if this is just one server in one restaurant in the States, and he's producing this 6 foot by 6 foot piece that's double sided, each piece has maybe like 10 tables worth of orders on them, like just how much, just to try to give like a visual impact of like what that looks like, because it's hard to kind of like wrap your head around if you're just talking about it. So that was where that came from. So I had pieces on the ground that kind of were more reminiscent of the marketplace in Senegal, where it would be just like people on pallets, or like their own mat, like that they bring from home. And on a market day, you just kind of bring like whatever you managed to grow. And then so that was kind of, so it was just kind of like this visual comparison of like what these two worlds kind of were doing, trying to make room in my head, essentially, as someone who was trying to bridge the gap between both. So that was kind of the basics of it. But
so tell us a little bit about your time in Senegal. What was your motivator to go join the Peace Corps?
I always kind of wanted to. I mean, it always seemed cool. And then I did, of course, I had a cousin who's a little older than me, and he went to Vanuatu. And so he had already done it. He did 2 years there, and he would send VHSs home back in the day of just the experience of, like, this is where we live, this is this. And a lot of other people in my family would be like, oh God, no. And I was watching them like, that looks awesome. That looks really cool. So it was just something that I just got like the bug in my head that I wanted to do it, like even before I went to college, because at the time you did have a undergraduate degree requirement, or like X number of hours of already having experience in a field to be able to even apply for the Peace Corps. So even before I went to college, I knew I wanted to apply. And so I graduated from Tulane, and then I actually worked there for a year. And pretty much the whole time that I was working there, I was also working on my Peace Corps application, because that's how long it can take. It can take approximately a year from the time that you start your account online and start your written application to the time you get an invitation to serve, can be about a year. So I went to Senegal in West Africa, and I was in a very small village. I worked in food security. I was a sustainable agriculture extension agent. So, which is to say I didn't have any agriculture experience really at all before I went. And it's certainly the agrarian community that I lived in of subsistence farmers knew more about agriculture than I ever will. It's just basically like being intermediary of someone who has access to resources that these farmers that live way out in the middle of nowhere, very hard to access resources out there. So I lived in the village. I lived there for 3 years. I lived with the family. Learned to spoke the local language, even though French is the national language, and I had some French experience. If people didn't have a high enough level of education, then they didn't have a whole lot of French. Like might have some. So it was really necessary to learn the local language if I was going to work with the local farmers. So set up programs. We call them pilot farmers. So it definitely was. I mean, it certainly wasn't. Just hand out seeds and leave. Like we had a sort of a contractual relationship where it was like, okay, I have improved varieties of seeds that, they're not genetically modified seeds. It's just seeds that have been hybridized with other varieties of seeds that do well in the heat or that are more drought resistant or just produce higher yields than the local varieties that you all are using. So like I'll give you a kilo of this, but you show me where you plant it, bring me to the field that you're going to plant it in, show me which part of the field is like our seeds that you and I are working together with, and then I can monitor them. And then at the end of the growing season, they would have to, when they did the harvest, they would have to give me back twice what I gave them initially, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. Like when you do when you harvest, you get usually like, to give me 2 kilos of corn out of a whole harvest is like not too much. So, and then I would save that, and they would, save some for planting themselves next year. And then I would save some so that each growing season kind of built up on the one before it. So I could keep I would have the new seed because the seed bank actually was located in Senegal. It was in Dakar. And so the seed bank in Dakar, the capital city, and the Peace Corps had a working relationship. But it's just that the seed bank way out in the capital city of Dakar and your average farmer way down here, almost in Guinea or Mali, was the two countries that we bordered, that we were actually closer to them than we were to the capital city, that those guys aren't going to get that seed anytime, or even know that it exists. So that was kind of just like, I was just like a middleman for a lot of that. But I was there for 3 growing seasons. So pretty much by the end, I could save at the end of each growing season, save seed, and just build the number of pilot farmers that we had until pretty much the whole village, at least in the case of corn, like by the time I left of my 3rd growing season, everyone at least was using like the improved varieties of corn because they had seen that it did work better. That was a big thing that I learned, was that behavioral change, and we're seeing that a lot now, is something that takes time to expect results overnight, but it's important to keep on it and to be able to whenever you can give examples, especially like visual examples with the using the seeds as an example, just to get people to see that, like, because you can't just tell them that this is the best way to do it and the way that you've been doing it your whole life is wrong. But if I take a small part of their field and we just plant this and we plant it in a different way maybe than they normally do, and there's more of an impact of seeing, okay, this little patch of the field is doing great and the corn is like taller than me and I'm getting more out of that than I've ever gotten from a space versus the norm. So through doing that, we were able to try to extend to the village and then beyond to other villages, and then it was time for me to have a replacement. So
wow,
it's kind of the gist. But
3 years is a long time to spend in another country, and to spend living with another family.
Yeah.
What was some of the highlights of that experience for you?
I think definitely just with the gardening stuff, but then being able to do additional projects like gardening projects for the women, because the gardening was seen very much as like a woman's project. And a lot of what Peace Corps volunteers try to do is also like advocate for gender equality and also girls' education specifically, like so that the girls aren't being taken out of school at 12 or 13 to get married and start working in the home. And a lot of like female volunteers were able to kind of do that just by example, be like, well, I'm a 20-something-year-old female and I don't have a family, and look what I get to do. So maybe your child should be able to have that kind of a chance by not being taken out of school so early. So like there was a girl in my family and she was able to stay in school. So that was great. And then, so I was talking about the gardening. So we always did like secondary projects too. So being able to set up a project that would allow for the women who already do like an insane amount of work for the family, for the village, like from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed, to make the gardening practice for them easier and a little bit more permanent of a location. So because they would just move locations each planting season for the gardening was more like a dry season activity, and then they would water in the morning and water in the evening. And then because during the dry season, it's just there's places and fields that they can use, but they would have to move from like one field to the next, and it would depend on like if the farmer allowed them to which farmer allowed them to use it that year, and they would put up like bamboo fence, and then it'd have to all come back down. So we were able to get funding from a grant to be able to have people a well dug and then in like a centralized location in a space that would make for good planting year round, and then have like a permanent fence set up with cement posts that weren't going to go anywhere. So just to give them a permanent location to be able to plant every year and take some of the guesswork out of like, where are we going to garden this year? Are we going to be able to garden this year? Because they shouldn't have to wonder if they're going to be able to plant their vegetables that year. So that was kind of some of the secondary projects were really important. We did a lot of malaria awareness and prevention type projects. It's where like the visual aids kind of came in handy, being able to I had never really made stencils before, but we made stencils and there's a type of tree called the neem tree. So you can make neem lotion just out of the leaves and some soap, and it makes really good bug repellent. So and then trying to encourage people especially during the rainy season. I should do it all year, but especially during the rainy season to use a bed net. So we did have bed net distributions that were funded through donations that we and fundraisers that we put on. But the stencils, like for the neem lotion, like going to the we call them health huts. So, but there are various sizes, but like health huts in different towns and stuff. And just real quick, like tagging of just like a 6-step process in like 4 different colors, so that anyone can go look and see like how easy it is to make this neem cream that then they can use as a insect repellent. So some of the highlights definitely came from these secondary community building projects that we did. It was great to do this, to work in the field and see like actual, because it's hard to wrap especially when you grow up in the like developed world and you're not a farmer, like going through the 8 weeks of training that we had in country in Senegal, and they're just talking about, hey, so your field and you're going to want to do this, and the measurements between the rows, and it's like I can't even wrap my head around what a field of corn looks like outside of like Field of Dreams. So like how does this even work, like the tech? So even just that, like appreciating more like where your food comes from, because you live in a community now that, like I said, are subsistence farmers. Like farming is everyone's job, because you grow the food that you need to survive, and then if you have some extra, to sell. So
wow. So when you do this 3 years out in Senegal and West Africa, and you return to the West, right? To to the US, to Massachusetts. What did you miss about Senegal, and what did you appreciate about home?
Some of like obviously like the comforts that we sort of take for granted, I appreciated by coming home, like hot water, running water, electricity, things like that. I did kind of come to miss like the the community aspect of it. It's not like it was a small village, but you know, in terms like the communal aspect of it, like we're all very, I mean, obviously now we're very shut in because we have to be, because it's actually for the greater good. But just in terms of our normal lives too, like it's striking sometimes, like just to go back to like the neighborhood that I grew up in, and everyone is very shut in as part of their just normal everyday. Like, and if you go over to somebody's house and just knock on the door nowadays, it's like, it's very suspicious, or what do you want? There's something that you want from me. And so why are you here? Whereas like it was you know, they had a term for it called Tarenga, and it was just called, and it just meant hospitality. So you could just walk in, and granted, it's like a much more open concept anyways. The village, like a compound is essentially just a series of huts that have a fence around it, and now you've established your family's compound. But you know, a stranger essentially could just walk into the compound and sit down in the middle, like on a, you know, wooden bench or something, and they'd get like, do you want some water? Do you want? And then after about 5 or 10 minutes, it's like, okay, so who are you? And you know, what can we do for you? Or like, why are you here? And it could just be that he was just somebody walking by for the day, and it got hot, and he wanted to sit down in the shade and have something to drink, so he just stops at somebody's compound, and that's not weird. Like, so that's something I definitely missed a little bit, or it was something that was striking difference when you come back here, and it's like, and people are very much more close, and for good reason sometimes, but yeah, that was something. And then the things that I appreciated at home, obviously being with my family, being able to see my family, because I didn't go home. I only went home once in the 3 years. And that was because I extended, because a typical contract is usually 2 years. And then you can extend for another year. And I chose to do that because the village that I was in didn't have a volunteer before. I was the first one. So the projects that I did, again, everything moves like compared to, you know, fast American pace, everything moves at a snail's pace. So that's like one of the hardest things to adapt to, is that things are not going to happen quickly, and you have to be okay with that. So that's something that I took from my experience there, that I, at first, is annoying to Americans, like, oh my God, like everything takes forever to get anything done. But it becomes one of the things that I most appreciate, or that you take with you when you leave. But the, sorry, so the projects, again, there weren't any already started when I got there. So they all kind of started from scratch. So after about 2 years, you feel like things are kind of, you're getting on a roll with all these things. And then it would be, to have to leave would kind of be disappointing for me, but then also a volunteer coming into that, like your first 3 months, you're really just trying to like integrate into the community and learn the language and stuff, and to drop like a bunch of projects that were in various stages of completion onto a new person that really is just trying to figure out how to navigate this new place would kind of be unfair to them too. So I extended for the 3rd year. I also helped in kind of like a leadership capacity with the other volunteers for my region. They asked if I would help do that, and I said sure. So it was good to do the 3 years, and then and I was able to come home between the 2nd and the 3rd year. So I mean, you're allowed to come home anytime that you want. You have like vacation time as any other job, but it just never seemed like a good time, and also you have to pay for it, so it's not cheap.
Well, I think it's a wonderful thing that you did, and clearly you have this drive to help and to serve others. You just qualified recently as an EMT, so congratulations.
Yes, thank you very much.
And you just secured a position starting in the summertime at Boston EMS. So again, congrats on that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a long process, but I mean, I guess you kind of want it to be. So
how does it feel going into that field when we're in this moment of just upheaval? Pandemic, the protests.
Right. Yeah. I think for me anyway, it's going to be nice to have like a direct line of being able to be able to give back or to help. I think a lot of people want to help, but then it becomes overwhelming with the myriad of, sometimes there's so many options of ways to help that it can be overwhelming and people shut down. So I think just being able to have it be part of like my everyday job. And again, I'm going to be in training in the academy for another few months. But just to be able to, I would feel almost like selfishly feel better to be out in the field and doing stuff, rather than trying to do being uncertain about like if the help that I'm offering at home is effective, or and it all is. It's just for me, it kind of eliminates that question of like, am I doing anything today to help? If it's part of my day job, then I can say, yeah, I'm doing a little something. So for the effort, and then and then just I also with some of the volunteer work that I do with the Dorchester Art Project. Is a fantastic organization in Dorchester that helps to serve underserviced individuals that would normally not have the same kinds of opportunities in terms of exhibiting artwork or having space to produce their artwork. So I've just been helping them in a small capacity, but just like helping organize their database of the dozens of amazing local artists that they work with, and making sure that their work gets out to the public as well. So if I can just help a little bit in both areas, I think that's partly why I wanted to do the Peace Corps too, is because I wanted to feel like I was having a more direct impact on an issue, even if it was only for a couple of years. So I think that was part of why I also chose to go down the EMT path, because I wanted to have a more just like hands-on, to borrow the term grassroots, but it's almost like an emergent experience, or with someone's experience with emergency medicine. The EMTs, the first responders, are kind of like the grassroots responders, in that like they're the ones that see the situation unfold. They're the ones that get to see, and it is kind of a privilege, and it's something to have respect for, that you get to be the one that sees them at that moment when they call. Like you see the scene unfold more so than like their ER doctor or their physician that ultimately sees them. You, as the EMT that shows up on scene, are the ones that see them first. And so it is something that it's almost like a privilege to be able to do that. And I think that's what drew me to it.
Amazing. So you talked about, being away from your practice of art for some time, and returning to it a little over a year ago, after you got sober. So tell us about your decision to become a sober man.
Yeah, I kind of decided to go to seek treatment, to seek help, kind of before I was mandated to by a court system, because that was probably the next step, honestly. After you've been fired twice for the same thing, probably you kind of have to take a look at yourself and be like, well, any person in recovery will tell you that denial plays a huge role in your day-to-day life. That, even though you're, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, but like, I'm still not a duck. Like, I'm special. Like, I'm too internally unique. Like, so none of this applies to me. But so it was just kind of like, was time. And so I did, I went to intensive outpatient program. So I didn't do any inpatient. I did the intensive outpatient, and it was, it was intensive. It was like 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday, from like 8:30 to noon, at this great place called Ad Care in Boston. And because it was, and so I was very fortunate to be able to kind of create my own like high bottom. Like if you're familiar with the terms like high bottoms and low bottoms, but like everyone knows rock bottom, but there's kind of like subsets where a high bottom, which I kind of would see myself as, that I'm grateful to be, is that somebody who is able to recognize that they need to get sober and is able to get sober or seek treatment at a time when they haven't necessarily lost everything. Like, I lost a couple of jobs, and some self-respect and some self-esteem and things like that. But it wasn't like I had a spouse and a family that left me, and I didn't have a career necessarily that all came crumbling down, and I never did go to jail, even though I would, like I said, it probably, like, if I didn't stop things when I did, probably would have been the next thing. And thank God hurt anybody. And so to be able to have that kind of like high bottom experience is something that's very fortunate to have. And I'm super fortunate to have, a very supportive family and family and friends that, understood and were there for me. And I was happy to still have them as well, because a lot of people that by the time they decide that treatment is for them, they don't have a lot of people on their bench anymore. They've burned a lot of bridges. And so again, high bottom, I was able to, I haven't done that yet, thank God. So
I like that you said yet.
Yeah.
It's just a good reminder that we could quite easily still go right back there. And
it's just, all you have is today, and everything. It's only like an arm's length away. Like everything can blow up in just an arm's length. So it's always something good to keep in the forefront. And I still do meet with my same clinician once a month from AdCare, which is great, just to like keep myself accountable. And because that's also too, like the issue with relapse a lot of times is that people relapse when things are going good. Like when things are when they're starting to see how like full their life can be and have in sobriety, and like how good things are, then it's like that's when I've seen that in myself even in the last like year and a half, where it's like it's when things are going well that you're at the worst higher risk of relapse, because you have these moments of like, oh yeah, well, I deserve it, or you start to delude yourself into thinking, this one especially, where it's like, well, maybe that was just a bad patch. Like maybe maybe I don't actually have a problem, because look, it's been like I've made it this far, and that's when this progressive disease way back in. So even just meeting beyond trying to go to meetings of my own, like having a clinician, like where you have an appointment and you have to show up, like, well, now it's on Zoom, but still, to help keep me accountable, so that if it is starting to move to like the back of my mind, that's where it can kind of sneak up on you. So just always keeping it in the forefront. It's the most important thing.
Absolutely. And I saw something the other day. You obviously, that I'm also a sober person as well. I've been sober for coming up on 7 years this year, and but it's just a day at a time. But I saw something the other day which made me laugh, and it said, I wonder how these people go out and just have a couple of drinks, because when I go out, I literally sabotage my entire life. Like it's never just, it was never just a couple of drinks. It was, fast track to, how much chaos and damage could I cause myself in a short space of time.
Yeah. And I was like, and then obviously there's so many like platitudes in the recovery world, but like, I always like the one where it was like, one is too many and 100's not enough. So it's like, and that always stuck with me, that it's like, yeah, that's true. It's like, you can't.
I think it's interesting that so many folks in our community of artists do struggle with addiction, mental health and addiction throughout the decades of, or even probably centuries of, historic artists that suffered with this ailment. We were talking before we got on the call about how, a lot of celebrities are really putting themselves out there right now to show that, this is the face of recovery, that it isn't something that you need to be ashamed of, that, you can live a good life without chemicals.
Right. Exactly. And I think and with any kind of mental illness, like the more people talk about it and the less stigmatized it becomes, the better it is for anybody, even if you're not personally affected by it. Because everyone is affected by it in some way, even if it's tangentially, and you might not even know you're affected by it because you don't know the person that it's directly affecting, at least not yet. So I think, the more that people talk about it, and there is still that romanticized, and I feel it sometimes too, that romanticized idea of the artists like drinking and then coming up with like this beautiful piece, or like, their however, like the romanticized visions of like the artists or writers, especially, that would just like get hammered every day and then write masterpieces. So it's like, so especially creatives that are sober, that can speak out about it more, and then people can say, oh, you don't have to be sober, or you can be sober and still be a creative person. Like, you don't have, it's not the link to your creativity to be an altered state of mind. So
Yeah, there's this idea that, to be genius, you have to be intoxicated.
Yeah,
I think it was Oscar Wilde said, write sober, edit, no, write
right.
drunk, edit sober.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, and I couldn't
Yeah,
remember who said it, so I didn't want to bring it up. But yeah, that was him.
it's such bad messaging. It's,
Right.
it really is.
Yeah, and you get the idea behind what he's trying to say is that when you're being creative, lower your inhibitions or let down your guard. But you can learn to do that in sobriety too. It's just so
100%.
you need the crutch of alcohol to help you do it anymore. So
Right. How was your approach to the work and the process different in sobriety versus when you were drinking?
well, for one, it's getting done. That's the biggest one. Like, it's actually happening.
Right.
Because I used to do that a lot. Like I would have my room, which that's the door behind me. I had, I still use my small room space as also my studio space. So that's a goal of mine. One of these days is to try to find an external space to be my studio. But I would have all the best intentions in the world and have like an easel set up and canvas with like a project that I had been meaning to get done for months, and it was just still just sitting there and all my stuff out. And so the result of that being, not only am I occupying the majority of what should be my living space with just a mess that's not serving any purpose, but also it's like this visual reminder every day that like I suck, because there it is. Like I haven't done, another day went by and I haven't done anything on that. So just in terms of just the actual practice, being able to do that, because then you also feel like, well, I need to, I need to have a few drinks and then I'll work on it. But then you have a few drinks, then you have a few more, and then now it's like, well, now you're not getting anything done. Well, now it's too late, maybe tomorrow. And then it's just this endless cycle. So that's a big part. And then it also allows me to it's allowed me to kind of inject my own story. Because I think that was where a little bit was missing with this MFA project and talking about disparate worlds and things like that. Like, and it was my story, but there was a little bit of like a personal element that was sort of missing. Like I was presenting all this stuff, and it's I'm the one that's comparing these two worlds. So there's that bit of me in it. But I think my practice now is more deeply personal, because like the concept itself is based around my own personal struggle and my own personal wanting to tell my story, instead of telling the story of these grander, bigger concepts. Now it's smaller, and now it's just me, but can be maybe applied to a larger scale in terms of the number of people that might be able to relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it allows me to be able to, like, especially when I'm showing the work, like I can also show the work easier than these grandiose installations. I can show a small painting encourage people to look up close at them, because it has this small writing. Because I was able to sort of repurpose the orders that I was using, because they initially had the purpose of sort of presenting abundance and labor and things like that of that nature in their first iteration. But now I still had them all, and now they kind of serve the purpose of what my mindset was like when I wrote a lot of them, because a lot of them I wrote when I was just haggard, running around as a server who was like either half in the bag at work or hungover or just like losing my mind. And so it's almost like going back and looking at them, it's like, wow, they're orders of food, but they also kind of look like the crazy like journal entries of a person that's going off the deep end. So when I started looking at it from that lens, it was like, well, that's like tough to kind of face, but also it's important to face, and then it makes for an interesting element to add to my work, and then and sort of see. So it's sort of cathartic for me, but then also it adds this extra level of value and communication to the work, so that when someone else is looking at it and they're like, what is all this writing? I'm like, oh, it says French fries. Like, why is it say French fries? And then I can kind of go deeper into it, and then like 9 times out of 10, if the topic of sobriety comes up, the person knows somebody that, oh, that, my sister or my, somebody. So it just, I think people get to take away more from those conversations that the artwork can encourage as well, versus some of like the installation pieces that you just kind of look at and move on. So.
I often struggle to look at some of my old work, because I kind of think of them in a similar way that you just described, like they're old journals.
Yeah.
They're very visceral tokens of what I was feeling and experiencing through some of the darkest times in my life.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are in a closet.
Yeah.
How do you feel when you revisit some of those pieces where, you, like you said, it was a time where you were really spiraling?
Yeah. So I think, it's almost every time that if I do a piece that incorporates these paper orders, it's almost like I have to kind of acknowledge it at least every time I take one out of the envelope of them that I have, and I paste it to the canvas. It's there, and some look more normal than others, so it's like I can almost track like where my brain was at that day, or like maybe like how drunk was I that day when I was working. And then, so I think that's where it becomes kind of, in terms of also, like I mentioned, keeping your recovery and your sobriety at the forefront of your mind when you work with it as part of your practice. It is always going to be at front and center, at least while you're doing that piece or while you're working that day. So it's got almost a bit of a therapeutic aspect to it as well. Not that, and in some ways therapeutic because it makes you feel bad, but the therapy doesn't always make you feel good. So you have to you're working through some stuff and trying to get it out and trying to maybe you need to feel those feelings. So, so I think it's important. And then, it was also important to me to some of the projects that I started and that I mentioned, that I was always like, oh, like I suck because I haven't gotten this done. But to be able to finish them in sobriety, and also I think make them better, and then have them be done. It was almost like not closing the book on that one, but like turning something that anytime you can turn something that might have been seen as a failure into a success, I think is always a big win as well. So going back to them, and then even if I had ones that I was like, I think that's done. But I want to put like my new sober hand on it, and kind of like seal the deal that like I acknowledge that this happened and that but here's here's how I've grown from it. So yeah, being able to turn that, to transform it, and again, like mine it for some value. There is value to that piece, even though it might make you feel bad to look at it. It does have its own intrinsic value. So being able to recognize that and find that, I think, is important.
Absolutely. So it is Pride Month right now.
Yeah.
And you are a member of the LGBTQ community, like me. We got a lot of similarities. Tell us about your coming of age story. How was your experience as a boy growing up in Boston?
Yeah, it was kind of, I did more of my growing up, like high school age in New Hampshire. We had moved from the Boston area at that point, and so it was kind of a small town, not like ultra conservative, but like I didn't know any other gay people. I didn't know there was maybe like one or two other people in my graduating class that people knew were gay, but at the same time it was like it wasn't celebrated. It was like, oh, that person. And so it's very hard to even consider if you might fit in that category as well, when you don't feel like the people that are very well received. So didn't mention anything about it in high school. and never even really came out in college. It was in my 20s, and I started telling people, actually when I was in the Peace Corps. I didn't tell any really like Senegalese nationals, not to say that like my family, like my host family that I lived with would have kicked me out or anything like that. But at the time that I was in Peace Corps, it was still, homosexuality was still illegal in Senegal. So I really just didn't want any, like, not that I thought I was going to get arrested in the middle of the night or anything like that, but just anything that could happen. Like if even there was like a rumor that my name was Samba. So like if there was a rumor that Samba was like one of them, and then it reflects Portland, my family that's taken care of me for the last couple of, God forbid anything like went wrong for them. So kind of kept it to myself from them, but I started telling people in the Peace Corps community, because obviously that's a very supportive community. And then just kind of was telling people back home with like the added benefit of an ocean between us, like it never hurts in case anything does go wrong. But I never had a single negative response to it at all. So that was good, but it was unique in that sense that I was kind of like doing it from overseas and then seeing people in person like many months later. And so it just kind of has become like an accepted part of who I am, which it should be for everybody. But it was that was just kind of like the unique part of it. Because I think also too, I thought like, you tell yourself too that, well, maybe these feelings are being influenced by the media or like what I'm seeing on TV or things like that. Like if I'm completely detached from all that and then we see how I feel, I'm like, well, I still feel the same way, even though I'm in the third world, in a third world country, in a hut. Like those feelings are still the same as they were when I was back home. So this probably something to that. So yeah, it was kind of unique in that, maybe I guess a little bit, but I'm glad I was young, on the younger side. Like even in your 20s, to come out in your 20s these days is still on the younger side of the spectrum. So I'm glad that I was able to live in a time where I was able to do it younger, and then especially like the kids these days that are out like so young, it's like it's great for them. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done, but it is good to see.
Was there any LGBTQ icons or heroes or pioneers that you looked up to?
I don't know if there was anyone like in particular that I did, but there were some kind of moments where like it's like fictional characters, but like ways that my mom and I kind of related. Like we both loved to watch Twirling Pig together. Like that was the show that we would watch together, and there was no discussion about like if I was gay to like the characters on the screen, but it served at least to like the fact that she and I could both laugh at the show, and she wasn't laughing at them because they were so ridiculous. Like she was laughing because it's a comedy, and she didn't seem to have any problem with like their lifestyle. That it made me a little bit, it was kind of nice to have that sort of comfort, that where even though I wasn't out yet, like I kind of could see what the reaction would be when I finally decided to, that I could feel a little bit more assured that I wouldn't have a negative reaction, especially from her, where like she and I could watch the show together and legitimately enjoy it. So that would be, I guess, an example, like if I had to think back of like any LGBT icons or like or influences that I guess helped, that would be watching her.
I think that's why it's so important that there is representation in the media, in television, in film,
Sure.
Of the various intersectionality, of our particular movement, so that kids who may be struggling to come to terms or struggling to, share with their loved ones their truth, that they have somebody that they can see as, living a good life, as a good example. So I totally relate to
We were
that.
just watching a movie actually, and this guy, and the premise of the movie is a guy in his 20s coming out and comes out to his friends first, and then he's trying to work up the courage to tell his mom, and he's got like note cards, and then he's trying to like role play with his friend about like coming out, and all he can think to do is he's just like saying like Elton John, Neil Peart, and his friend is like, are your note cards just famous gay dudes? And he's kind of like, because I tried before. Like that was all he could say. He was like, "Yeah, but mom, but look at all these famous guys that you like." Just in
Yep.
case. So it was funny.
That's awesome.
But yeah.
So what do you hope that people take away from your work?
I think like where I was sort of touched on before is just like whether they relate to the story or not, just that there are stories to be found in work if you give it the time to be able to sort of, I like the word like excavate, because it really gives this image of like digging to find the value and the meaning and stuff, and especially with shows like Conception and other shows where it's like a face-to-face sort of encounter, that again, if they enjoy my story or can relate to it, that's great. But then also that maybe I stopped and I talked to the person that made that for 2 minutes, and look how much more I got out of it than just kind of looking at it and then moving on. So maybe taking that with them to the next artist that they see, and like, oh, maybe I'll ask this person what that last, and see if they offer what that last artist offered me, which was a pretty interesting or cool glimpse into a bit of their life, if they'll share that with me. So I think maybe it would, I would like it to, if people would be able to sort of rethink their approach to art, how they view art, and not just like in the visual, but also like if they take the time to hear the story behind it, how that can elevate the work for them as well. So that would be great if I knew you did that.
Who were some of your art heroes? Who did you look up to? Was there any famous artists whose work you admire?
I always liked, in terms of painters, like especially in college, like Gerhard Richter, I always really liked. And I think part of what I got out of his work was that he didn't really fit into one box, and his work a lot of times showed different qualities of his skills as a painter. So like he would have very realistic paintings, and he always kind of had like a blur to them, but that showed that he had technical skill. And then he would have other paintings where it's just like the smear type paintings where it's layers upon layers, and then just takes like a squeegee and goes all the way across. And then he's amazing abstract pieces. So it just kind of helped me in terms of my own practice, being like, I don't have to fit into one box. I don't have to do one thing. I can have a series of paintings hanging up where but you can tell they're all mine, but they don't necessarily have to relate in terms of technique or anything like that. So you're not pigeonholing yourself. Like if you can be a really technically fine painter and be able to reproduce things on a technical level, but then you can also have skill as an abstract painter as well. So there's no like limit necessarily to what you can do as a painter. So that was great. One of my professors was kind of a hero of mine, who unfortunately passed away. So her name is Sandy Chisholm, and I'd recommend anybody look up her work. But she was a New Orleans-based artist. Yeah, I went to Tulane, so she was a professor there, and she was just an incredible teacher and mentor as well. She mentored me through my I had a thesis project in undergrad as well, which was a mural, which I had not done before, at a local charter school in New Orleans post Katrina. So he mentored me through that, and a lot of what she kind of did was like, I don't know if I got maybe like the looking for value in things idea from her, but a lot of times like her work would be just kind of like build it up and then break it down and find like what's important in the work, and then just build it up, break it down, build it, and don't just get stuck in one, that looks good, so I'm done. Like, no, build it up and then break it down, and like break it down into its part, see what else you can find in that. So in terms of like her practice of painting. So she was somebody that influenced me quite a bit as well as a painter. So yeah, we miss her very much. But
Well, I think that's a beautiful tribute to her.
Yeah.
All right, folks. So if anybody has any questions for Steve, do jump into the comments. Steve, aka Sully, which is a great nickname, and you were sharing with me that it's a family nickname that's been passed along through the generations, right?
Yeah, I think anyone with the last name Sullivan gets called Sully at some point in their life. Yeah. This is whether or not you allow it to stick.
Right.
I was cool with it. Yeah, my dad before me, and then my older brother, and then for me anyway, like it was because in high school my group of friends, which I'm very fortunate to still have in my life. There's about 4 or 5 on any given day. Steve's like walking around hanging out together, so it was out of necessity too, in some regards. That like by the end of it, all the people named Steve, no one actually was called Steve because everyone had a nickname to work around that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what is next for you, Steve? What are you hopeful for once everything is back to normal, quote unquote normal?
The new norm.
Yes.
Well, I'm very excited to be entering the academy next month. As long it's tentative, but as long as everything still goes as planned, and just to continue to learn more about emergency medicine and how to take care of people. And I'm excited to have something like one job to focus on at once, and just try to just really get really good at one thing. I'm also excited by just the opportunities that I've had with starting to volunteer with Dorchester Art Project, and like when they're able to do more live events, like being able to be more hands-on in terms of helping with that. And just being able to use whatever platform I might be able to start building to use toward toward these bigger issues, especially like recently I've seen the benefit that you can apply whatever platform you've developed can be a very powerful tool in terms of helping other people as well. And I hadn't really necessarily viewed it that way before, but now it's inescapable. So I've done a lot of work, especially with the time that we've had, extra time to kind of build my own art business, and like working with you, Rachel, has been amazing. So like I want to continue working on that and building on the work that I've already done, not just because I want to have a more successful art business, but because now that we've all seen the positive influence that having a platform, a large platform, can create, then that's something that I find motivating as well. So I would like to see what I can do with that.
Amazing. Well, Steve, I look forward to keeping up with your progress. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you. For those who are looking to learn more about your work, can you give your website? We'll put it in the comments.
It's it's bysully.com. And so just BYSULLY.com.
It's right there in the comments. There we go. Perfect.
Oh, okay, thanks. So bysully.com. That just has like my whole backstory, any of the like shows that I mentioned, work from the last 2019 when I was really getting back into my work, and then 2020, and there's a shop there as well. And then you can follow me on Instagram for pretty much daily updates on how it's. I mean, I've been, like I mentioned, using it less to amplify my own work and to amplify the voices of melanated artists, and specifically people in the Dorchester area. But so that's Stephen with a V. Sully.Sullivan is my handle on Instagram. So I encourage people to follow me there.
Great. I've added that to the comments as well. All right, wonderful. Well, great having you, Steve. Best of luck with everything. We will keep up with your progress. And thank you, folks, for tuning in today. We'll be back again tomorrow, same time, 11 a.m. for Coffee with Artists. That is our show for today. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.